dealing with how God relates to us, how we relate to God, and how we relate to each other through God, there would be 4 major words that would define the superpower. Now, for us to understand this morning, and I'm going to qualify this right now, even if we come to a complete understanding of this superpower, doesn't mean we have it. It's not until we're living it through God we have it. But this is the approach we're going to take on this superpower. We're looking at it not as a single thing, but something in layers. There will be 4 layers of understanding to the Word. And until we really get a hold of all 4 layers, we really don't understand God's view of this superpower called love. Not ours, God's view of this thing. So what's layer number 1? Well, layer number 1 would be something called agape, or a variation of that word agapeo. And not to turn this into a language lesson, but it's important in dealing with this word to understand this word means something. And you know, sometimes agape is one of those words that gets thrown around. Agape love. This is this lofty, lofty love, and trying to define all of this. Give you a real practical explanation or translation. Agape love is social or moral love. Love in a social or moral sense. It is the extension of charity in benevolence. Social, moral love. More than any other word, this is something that a person is or they are not. 1 Corinthians 13. That is, if you read through your Bible much, you know that is the great love chapter. There's no chapter in the entire Bible that explains love as practically as 1 Corinthians 13. And all through that, it is this word that is used. This is the first layer. If love is this layered stone or whatever you want to consider it, this is the first, the core layer of it. And then 1 Corinthians 13, why it is such a popular chapter when we talk of love is because it takes all of this lofty word, this agape, and then hammers it out into very practical terms. And if you were to read through it, I hope this week, if you get a chance to do one thing in your private reading, take this chapter and give it a read through. This kind of love is the one that in your nature, if it is part of your nature, you will have patience where other people don't. And you'll respond in kindness where other people may not. If you have this kind of love, you'll have an inclination to care for people. And since you do, you are not wired to simply want what they have. Envy doesn't become part of your personal wiring. If you have this type of love, the focus tends to be outward. You're an outward-looking person. And since you are outward-looking and you're taking in what is around you, you are not obsessed with yourself. Which means you don't get hung up with the baggage of, do I look good? Am I coming across right? In other words, vanity becomes a very futile act. If you have this type of love, there's humility. And do you remember once we talked, the definition of humility isn't like the lowly me. Humility in its true form is simply knowing exactly who and what you are. No more, no less. So, with humility, this person doesn't take themselves too seriously. And you know, there's a wonderful thing when you don't take yourself too seriously, because then you're not easily provoked. It's hard to provoke a humble person. And not surprisingly, since there is a moral core to this kind of love, you don't rejoice in the harm of others. Not even your enemies. There is no happiness, there's no gratitude in seeing anyone suffer. You know what? Revenge makes people small real quick. I was thinking as I was going through this layer of love, I thought of when 9/11 happened. Do you remember this response globally to this event? This tragedy and suffering that was beyond what anybody could really fathom in the moment. And there was a line that defined most of the world's response to this. And it was a German minister, Peter Struck. And all he said was a simple sentence, "Today we are all Americans." And it encapsulated the whole thing. We are suffering with you. We feel what you feel. But do you know there was actually areas in the world that rejoiced at the suffering? They were glad that it happened. and they were happy. Now, take the politics aside. Just put it aside, American, not American, it doesn't matter. The fact of rejoicing, being happy for that level of suffering, that turns you into a very, very small person. Revenge shrinks people. Isn't it amazing? Revenge and hatred come so naturally to human nature, and yet there's nothing that makes us more inhuman. Wow. Proof that we come with a fallen nature. But this type of love, this layer, this core love, this thing called agape overcomes that. It's greater than that type of thing. It's the type of love when Jesus talks, he says, this is the type of love that you can pray for those who persecute you. This is the type of love that you can bless those who curse you. Pray for those who persecute you. And it's really a practical thing, because if you do anything else, you're down a path of darkness. You're headed to bitterness. You're headed to being a smaller person. This type of love knows that's the only response that brings life. And it says, in this kind of love it rejoices in truth. Well, that sounds pretty self-evident. Well, yeah, if it's a thing of God, we rejoice in truth. But you know what? That's easier than it sounds. Because sometimes to share the truth with someone is telling them something they don't want to hear. And it's trying to do it in such a way that you're not harming them even more. Truth isn't always an easy thing to say. And consider, when Paul was writing this whole Corinthians letter, people were being martyred for telling the truth. So rejoicing in truth isn't always an easy thing, but this agape love has such courage that it can do it. And then if you read Corinthians 13, you hit this part in the chapter. It says basically this. It says that this kind of love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. And at first look, you look at that and say, okay, so this type of love turns people into like a gullible doormat. You know, I think of, some of the things people will believe. I mean, you'll believe everything? You'll just put up with everything? Is that what it's saying? No. Once again, just to bounce back into the original language of it, when it says bear all things, the word there is kind of neat. It's not actually a word, it's a term. It means to cover quietly. To cover quietly. How does that fit in the whole aspect of love? Well, just as an illustration, consider marriage. Consider that intimate person that you're involved with on a 24/7 type of deal. Now, if you go to marriage counseling 101, they will tell you, well, first they'll say, expect to argue, everybody's going to argue. But the first rule of engagement, when you do, because you will at some point have some argument, either that or one of you doesn't have a brain, right? Everybody ends up in some kind of disagreement. Rules of engagement. One is, don't keep score, don't throw up the past. Every counselor with his salt will tell you that. Don't throw up the past. Want to destroy your marriage? Just do that. Have some things that you refuse to let go, and every time you end up in a heated discussion, bring them up. Remember when you did da-da-da-da, and do. But this type of love is powerful and wise enough that it covers quietly. It's not that you can be fooled and tricked and everything over and over again. What it means is, are we done with this? We're done with it. Did we deal with it? We dealt with it. It's there. It's not swept under the rug. It is simply put away in a healing box somewhere. That's what this type of love can do. And this type of love it doesn't forget the past. It simply is healed from it and is able to move beyond it. This type of love will believe all things. I remember there's a commercial I loved on TV there for a while where this girl, and the whole thing was, it must be true, it's on the internet. And it's everything that happened, it must be true. Where did you meet this guy? On the internet. So this type of thing. This type of believes all things is not talking about that. I will believe anything you tell me. It's not talking. It's talking about believing in a person. Believing in the potential. Everyone in this room right now is that glass half full, half empty. Depending on what you want to concentrate on, everyone in here has some faults that, man, if you just focus on those faults, it'll drive you nuts. And everyone in here has potential that man, can you imagine if this person was cut loose in this way or that way? Can you see their strengths? That's what this type of love is. It's the type of love that says, okay, I understand you're not perfect, but what's the potential? What's the gifts God has put in you? Man, imagine if we could harness it and release those gifts. So this type of love is looking for the best in people, and it draws it out. What better thing, what better love for you to have for your children even than this kind, right? Is, wow, look at the potential. What is it? How do we draw it out? And you're always hoping for the best in them because it is possible. No, not everyone's going to be an astronaut or become president, but every child can reach a full potential of what they can do. This type of love looks for the best in people. And it ties in real close with the hopes all things. That sounds a little tentative. Hopes all things. Well, I hope my kid turns out okay. You know, every parent has felt that at some time. But this type of hope isn't a tentative thing. Actually, in the translation of the word here, it means to expect. It means to expect. Now, if you went through our teacher training, or maybe somewhere else, maybe you took that course, what we do for our teachers here in Christian Ed and stuff, we did the 7 Laws of the Learner. And in that training, one of the things talked about the power of expectation. And I bet when you stop and think about it, you really know what it's talking about. Think of any child. You usually get what you expect from them. Or even an adult, that's the whole thing about micromanaging. If I think we use this illustration back there, we have tech guys that are trained, they're doing their job and all of that. Imagine if I did not expect anything from them. Oh, I don't think Larry knows enough to turn on his microphone. I'm going to run back there and turn it on for him. Well, I'm not expecting anything from Larry, and pretty soon he's going to realize he thinks I'm a dummy. He doesn't expect anything from me, and when you expect nothing, that's usually what you get. The power of expectation. Even when you get with kids, they can sense it. If you're teaching a class or you're dealing with your kids at home, they can sense if you expect nothing from them, nothing good that is. And in this laws of the learner, it's pointed out, if you're dealing and you're trying to teach children, they will sense what is expected and usually rise to the expectation, especially if it's a realistic thing. I believe in you enough and expect you to meet your potential in this. The power of expectation is an incredible thing that causes people to grow. The power of expectation, and it's in this thing called agape love. Agape love says it endures all things. And I love this one because it's a real simple word. Remain. Well, what does it mean, endure all things? It seems to remain. I stuck in it. I stuck to it. I stayed in it. We went through hard times, but I stayed in it. I remained in the relationship. As I was thinking about this one, I was just thinking of a visit for those who know Thelma Lisby has been, she's our senior member now, and has been married. I've been corrected on this, and so hopefully don't get re-corrected. 78 years she had been married. Is that right? Is that right, Mike? Sure. Okay, good. 78 years she's been married. Why I bring this up is this, is that Thelma's got her pulse on when people come by and tell her what's going on. And we were sitting and talking. She knew that the women's group was doing the book of Ruth in their study. And she was just commenting. She said, Ruth, the greatest love story ever told. And then she kind of giggled and said, I thought I lived the greatest love story. And I said, man, that is so cool, 78 years. And like, how do you argue with it? If you're with the same person intimately for all our faults and everything, and you can say that after 78 years, who can argue with it? Who can argue with time? This kind of love remains. It stays. It is in there. Agape love. Now you put all these things together, and now it doesn't sound so crazy. When it says this love doesn't fail, man, you can see why. You can see why. It can't fail if all of those things come together with the power of God behind them. Now, There it is. That's the core layer. And I promise you this. We get the other layers, since this is a quartz, the big layer. The other layers won't take us quite as long. But there it is, the core layer. And some Bible students in the best of intentions will say, well, when we're talking about love of God, this is it. Agape is the thing. If you're spiritual, it's all agape. That's the thing about it. But what I'm saying to you is this, is that no, it's not. It's the core. It's the biggie. But it's just the foundation for the other layers. The second layer is something we call phileo. As a matter of fact, Philadelphia gets its name from that, the city of brotherly love. Phileo. And in definition, if you look it up in a Greek dictionary, you would come up with this. It means to have affection or personal attachment as a matter of sentiment or feeling. We might call this, as far as I'm concerned, just to give it a vernacular, the warm and fuzzies. This is warm and fuzzy love. This is the love, oh, you feel warm on, all over when you feel. And you think, well, that sounds fluffy. When we go to church, we have agape love, not this phileo stuff. But listen to this. Check this out. John 16:27. Jesus talking. For the Father himself loves you, because you have loved me, and have believed that I have come from God. The word used here by Jesus is phileo, not that lofty agape. It is the warm and fuzzies. Think of how that translates here. The Father has the warm and fuzzies for you because you had the warm and fuzzies for me. And because we have these warm and fuzzies, you have believed in me. Now, I qualify with balance. Sometimes when people say this, God is love. This is what they're thinking, is the warm and fuzzies, and that's all. God loves everyone. He's not upset with anyone, and everything's okay. It's just warm and fuzzy. No, that's not. But that doesn't mean that we discount this layer. There is a warm and fuzzy side to the whole God thing. When we come in here, just think if we were nothing but agape in the form that, man, we'll do things, we'll meet our duty, I'll remain, I'll do this, but there was no warmth to it. Well, it might be a powerful thing, but it's very cold. It's very sterile. It doesn't sound very alive. This here, phileo, actually brings the flesh to the bones. It's the warmth to the whole Christian thing. Now, we can't be all warmth. There has to be the steel side of love, but it is important. It can't be disregarded, the second layer. So then we have a third layer, and the word would be charis. And a lot of times if you read in the Bible and you come across the word grace, it actually, if it was translated literally, it wouldn't say grace, it would have said gracious love. There's just a slight difference in what's going on, because grace is a thing. Gracious love is grace put into action. So it's defined like this. It refers to benefit, favor, gift, and liberality, especially the divine influence upon the heart. It's a reflected and a reflection in the life. That is gratitude. In other words, this type of love, just to start with, this is the type of love that transforms lives. This is the type of love that changes who you are and how you do things. And it's really interesting that this type is used to describe Jesus growing up. A lot of times when Jesus is mentioned in his younger years, this is the type of love mentioned. John 1:14 says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we beheld his glory, and the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth, it says. But actually the word here is gracious love. Gracious love. It's the gracious love that caused God to leave heaven and come down here with us. It's the gracious love that put him on a cross. It was the gracious love that kept him there. It is capable of amazing sacrifice. And it's a type of love that is filled with gratitude. Well, how does that work? Well, it's like this, and you can find, we were talking about forgiveness in the men's group and our thing, and Steve brought up a particular parable. You probably know the one where the king who forgave a great debt to one of his servants, but the servant wouldn't forgive someone else. And it kind of went on that way. It was referring to this gracious love. It is gratitude. Let me give a real practical example. Ron comes to me and he's really having a rough time in life. He's in a bad way. And I have to lend him $10,000. And his eyes just lit right up. Now, Ron accepts his $10,000. Then Cindy comes along, and Cindy forgot her wallet at home. She wants to buy a coffee on the road. So she asked Ron if she can borrow $10. And Ron said, no way. Not my money. Can't go there, girl. So here's Ron. And then I find out, hey, Ron, you know what? Your check's about to bounce. That's how the parable goes. And the bottom line is this: in this gracious love, Ron, if Ron has this gracious love, he said, I can't believe, I'm so grateful that someone would just go ahead and lend me that much money. Cindy, you need $10? Not a problem. Here it is, pay it forward thing going on. That's the type of love we're talking about. But then magnify that 1,000,000 times in the spiritual realm, and you get to see what we're talking about. In this case, we're talking about, can you forgive someone? Well, what has God forgiven you for? If we don't understand the depth of our own forgiveness, the level at which God had to forgive us, we're going to be in trouble. Here's what happens when this love is absent. You'll find these kind of things in the church. A church finds it very easy to sit in cold judgment of others because we understand right from wrong now, but we don't understand forgiveness. So we sit in cold judgment over others. This would be the type of church where members don't forgive each other, that we don't even get along. This is the type of church, if the love isn't in there, is that people leave, quote, offended. That type of thing. This is the type of love. If it's missing, you end up with proud people. We are good people. We are righteous people all on our own. Oh, yeah. Because we don't understand the forgiveness that was needed. This is the type of church that we can't even get along with each other. Because why should we? However, here we are in some serious trouble because the number one mandate given by Christ is, if you love me, you will love one another. Here's my commandment to you, love one another. Do that and you've done it all. It's like, as a matter of fact, in 1 John 4:20, do you realize it says this? If that we don't love one another, we don't even have the right to say we love God. That's some pretty serious stuff going on there. This love has the power to get over the wrongs. This is the love that if this is in you, this is the love where you can be the first to reach out. And you're the bigger person for it. This is the type of love where, you know, those cycles of bias, prejudice, or revenge that go on. This is the type of love that breaks those cycles. It's powerful stuff. This love is so powerful. Imagine this. Imagine if you had the ability that no matter who you met anywhere in the world, under any circumstances, you could still get along and love that person. What would that be worth to you? Think of the freedom. We move around in these circles, you know, like, well, that's not my type of person, or that's not my type of person. I'm different. They're weird or whatever. Well, imagine if you could get along, that you could love anyone in the human race. How liberating would that be? How vast has your horizon just become? It's an amazing thing. Even stopping at the third layer, it's not hard to see why this is a superpower. It's not hard to see. But then we hit layer 4, and I want to tell you something. This one is weird. Okay, get ready for weirdness. Start with the word. If you can pronounce it, then you get a free cup of raised coffee. I can't even say the word. But I love the meaning of the word. This fourth word, this fourth layer, if it was translated directly, it means this. You ready? Donkey yoke. Kev, I donkey yoke you, man. Big donkey yoke for you. Kevin might appreciate that. You got donkeys. So, you know, well, this is a rare word. You don't find it very often in Scripture. Where do you find it? Well, let me throw out one illustration here. Jesus talking in the most intimate relationships. John 5:20. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all things that he himself does, and he will show him greater works than these, that you may marvel. For the father donkey yokes the son. It almost sounds like kind of bad, doesn't it? What's he saying? Well, think about this. If you have a donkey that is an animal that you're using as, utility-wise, you don't hook a yoke on a donkey to push a cart. You would hook it on so he would be in front pulling the cart. Or if you use that donkey to pull a plow or something, he would be in the yoke, and pulling, he would be in front. This is meaning that what's coming here is that the father gets down and puts on the yoke himself. Hey, donkey, you want to see how to do this? Let me show you. I will put on the yoke, and I will pull the cart, and you see what I do. This is what the life of Jesus, he said his life was. The Father showed him, and then he shows us. The example of Jesus. Jesus put on the donkey yoke for us. Powerful love, because it's not saying do this because I say so. It's let me show you. Man, how do you argue with example? How can you argue with example? Superpower. Love is a superpower when it is seen in these layers, as it is seen in God's way. All for it, just think what's encapsulated. This love we're talking about, it's courage, it's the steel of resolve, it's the deepest possible wisdom, and it's still warm and inviting. All of these things together. With this superpower, you can be right with God. You're in a position where God can show you things, where God can give you things, where you can actually know and lead your destiny that you're meant to have. If you don't have it, you will be nothing. You ever hear that phrase? You're not going to amount to anything. Without love, it's not a vindictive thing. It's true. You will not amount to anything, according to 1 Corinthians. And you will gain nothing of any real value, no matter what it is that you gain. It's an amazing power to have. And the whole thing is, it sounds great even as we think of ourselves, but imagine that young person that you are trying to send off into life, be it your child or your grandchild or your great-grandchild. Imagine if you could instill this power in them. Where would their life go with this superpower? Well, how do you get it in there? Well, it brings us back to that number 4, that weird layer of the love thing we were talking about. The donkey yoke. It starts with showing it. Man, there's no way to teach love. It's more caught than taught, isn't it? The donkey yoke. You put on the yoke and do it in the biblical spiritual concept so they may see. Let me show you. And then we move from there. Now I want to throw a little mantra on this, if I can, in this whole thing. And it says, if you don't do it, who